Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Travis Forney. I'm an adult services librarian at the Willoughby Public Library in downtown Willoughby. We're coming to you live tonight from upstate New York, Willoughby Hills, and Chicago, Illinois. Tonight, I'm extremely excited to welcome Ted McClelland to our Between the Lines author series. Ted's going to talk to us about his new book, Midnight in Vehicle City. A reminder, you can keep up with future Between the Lines events at the Willoughby-Eastlake Public Library Facebook page and online at we247.org. Ted's going to be interviewed tonight by Barb Goudreau, who's a librarian at our Willoughby Hills Library. In addition to Midnight in Vehicle City, Ted is the author of Folk Tales and Legends in the Middle West and How to Speak Midwestern, as well as many other books about the Midwest, including The Third Coast about the Great Lakes and Nothing But Blue Skies. If you have a question for Ted during the talk, and you're watching on Zoom, type it in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat and I'll ask Ted your question. If you're watching on Facebook Live, type your question as a comment there, and we'll ask Ted your question at the end of the talk. Okay, welcome Ted. Thank you for visiting with us tonight.
Thanks for having me. Hi, Willoughby.
Before I hand it over, you're going to read a little bit from the book, and
yeah.
All right, great. Thank you again.
All right. Well, am I on?
You're on.
All right. I thought I would start. Let me just hold up the book here. This is Midnight in Vehicle City: General Motors, Flint, and the Strike That Created the Middle Class. It's about the 1936 and 1937 Flint sit-down strike, which led to the establishment of the United Auto Workers. And in the first chapter, there's an important character from Cleveland. So I thought I guess it's good to start reading at the beginning. And when I'm talking to Willoughby, it's good to feature someone from Cleveland. So I just thought I'd start at the beginning of the book, which explains the conditions that led to the strike and the organizer who was sent to Flint to sign people up for this new union, the United Auto Workers of America. And this chapter is called A Stranger in Town. The heat wave begins on the Great Plains in the Dust Bowl, that dead dry land whose barren fields have transformed it into a furnace. The summer of 1936 is the hottest anyone can remember. After killing the meager yield of crops in the farm states, the dome of heat spreads north and east, smothering the Great Lakes. In the second week of July, every afternoon, workers preparing for second shift at the General Motors plant in Flint, Michigan, look out the kitchen windows of their company-built Cape Cods and slope-roof bungalows at the thermometers bolted to the walls. The gauge is filled with red mercury, measuring triple-digit temperatures: 108 degrees, 105 degrees, 102 degrees, 104 degrees, day after miserable day in the lush, humid Saginaw Valley. It's so hot inside those brick factories. They were built to trap warmth during the hard winters, but they're kilns during this heat wave, even with all the windows cranked open. There are no fans to cool the workers, no air conditioning. Building automobiles is a strenuous, sweaty occupation, even during mild weather. The assembly line never stops moving, not once in 8 hours. If the company needs more cars, it cranks up the speed. Men who can't keep up don't keep their jobs. So the workers go home exhausted, too tired to talk to their wives and children, too tired to do anything but eat and sleep. They endure it because every day there's a line of men outside the personnel office, hungry for a job in this depression. Gilbert Gibbros has one of the toughest jobs at General Motors, grinding crankshafts at Chevrolet plant number 4, called Chevy 4, the engine plant in the Chevrolet complex, a collection of factories that steams and smokes and clanks all day and night on the south bank of the Flint River. One of the plants in that complex is nicknamed Chevy in the Hole, either because it lies in a depression alongside the river or because it's a hellhole, probably both. The crankshafts weigh 108 pounds, and Rose has to lift each one off the assembly line, set it on a grinding rack, then carry it back to the line when it's finished. By the end of a long shift, Rose will have lifted tons of metal with his bare hands and bare arms. Not even plow horses pull so much weight during a day. The men in the crankshaft department are the biggest and strongest at GM, men in the prime of their work lives. The company doesn't like workers over 40. It looks for reasons to fire them in favor of younger hires. But even the strongest are not stronger than this heat wave. On the day the thermometer spikes at 108, the hottest ever measured in Flint, 4 of Rose's coworkers faint on the assembly line. They're rolled onto stretchers and carried off the shop floor, but the crankshafts never stop coming. Get him a stretcher and get him the hell out of here, a foreman shouts every time a man collapses. And don't stop that line. If you miss one crankshaft, we'll fire you. At General Motors, the workers come and go, but the assembly line never stops moving. It moves as fast as men can bolt seats and doors and crankshafts onto cars, and then it moves faster. The heat wave passes, but the despised speed up, as the men call it, is an unceasing feature of factory life. Whenever there's a gap in the line as a result of a part shortage, the foreman speeds up the tempo for the rest of the day to ensure the plant produces its quota. At the beginning of a shift, the line might move at 40 cars an hour, but by the end it can be cranked up to 60. But this is faster than the lines are engineered to run, so cars jerk forward under the stress of the speed. A trim line worker whose job is to tack headlinings to an auto seat pounds the tack into his finger when a car lurches suddenly. His foreman tells him that lunch is coming in 15 minutes so he can go to the infirmary then. By the end of a day, the men are working so frantically that everyone is clustered at the end of the line because they haven't been able to keep up with the cars as they pass by. Workers arrive at the shop an hour early to lay out their parts, the only way to keep up with the pace of auto assembly, thus avoid getting fired. A factory wife complains that her wrung-out husband comes home so exhausted that, quote, he throws himself on the floor and he can't sometimes hold a fork in his hand afterwards. A man whose job it is to wipe down bodies at the end of the line with a gasoline-soaked rag doesn't have time to bring it up between jobs. The cars come at him so fast. He spatters gasoline on himself, burning his arms and legs. The unceasing approach of auto bodies drives him so mad he begins to hallucinate and hear bells ring. His brother drives up from Detroit to take him home. Most men aren't driven crazy, but many are driven to drink. When the line is running, it doesn't just run fast. It runs unceasingly. 9 hours a weekday and 5 on Saturday, Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve. You have to put in enough time to save enough money for the next layoff. After work, men drown their exhaustion in beer gardens. Families come to know their fathers as drunk, tired, and surly. The man was so driven by the speed up inside the factory that he came home unable to be a decent companion, either to his wife or children, and she had to take an awful lot of bad treatment from her husband, one worker's wife would recall. When a person is driven beyond human endurance, you become so resentful inside yourself, it's got to spill out somewhere. Not only is the work exhausting, it's dirty and dangerous. Workers dare not step off the assembly lines, even to use the toilet. There are no fans, no ventilation, no dust masks, no safety glasses. A man named Neil Yaklin works half blind because a chip flies off a chisel when he's driving rails into car bodies, 40 or 50 rails a minute, and lodges in his eye. He loses the eye, but he keeps working because there's no disability pay or unemployment insurance. There's no health insurance either, so it takes Yaklin 4 years and an appeal to the state labor board to get $1,800 for his missing eye. Presses chop off fingers, hands, even a leg. In the nickel plating department, where workers supply the finish to radiator grills with buffing wheels, the lye and lime dust settle in men's hair and depilates their heads. The dust is so thick that sometimes all you could do was stand there and cough for a couple of minutes, a worker later recalls. If you had said anything to a foreman then about wearing a mask to protect your nose and mouth, he would have called you a sissy. That sweltering summer, a labor organizer appears in Flint. Wyndham Mortimer, an auto worker from Cleveland and a member of the Communist Party, USA, is the first vice president of the newly formed United Auto Workers of America, which has recently broken away from the American Federation of Labor. At its first convention, held that April and May in South Bend, Indiana, the delegates agreed that the only way to build the union's membership is to organize General Motors, the nation's #1 automaker. They want to strike between Christmas and New Year's. From a GM tool and die maker, they learned that 2 Fisher body plants contain the dies that stamp out the body parts for all GM vehicles. Fisher 1 in Flint produces components for Buicks, Oldsmobiles, Pontiacs, and Cadillacs. Fisher Body in Cleveland produces components for Chevrolets. The Cleveland plant is already well organized, so Mortimer is dispatched to Flint to persuade the workers there that joining the union and going on strike will end their misery. On the morning of June 20th, Mortimer parks his car in front of the green awning of the Hotel Dresden, a red brick building with 6 tiers of cheap rooms at the corner of South Saginaw and 3rd. Mindful that the UAW's treasury contains only $25,000, he asks a desk clerk for the simplest lodgings available, a bachelor's room costing $12 a week. Signing his name in the register beneath the date, he is handed a key from the rack behind the desk and follows the bellboy upstairs, where he opens the door to a bed, a sink, a pair of windows darkened by rolled down shades. Mort, as he is known to his union. Let's see. Although he knows no one in this city, he is expected to win over for the United Auto Workers. Someone knows him and knows why he's here. As soon as Mortimer shrugs off his jacket, the telephone on the nightstand rings. You'd better get the hell back where you came from if you don't want to be carried out in a box, a voice threatens. Who is this, Mortimer demands, the silence on the other end. How would you like to go to hell, says Mortimer, banging the receiver down in its cradle. The next morning, Mortimer walks through the hotel lobby on his way to make a first tour of the vehicle city. A man sitting in an armchair spots the new organizer, folds his copy of the Flint Journal, and follows Mortimer out the door. From then on, wherever he goes in Flint, Mortimer finds a car full of men observing his movements. Pinkerton detectives, maybe. The Pinks had a history of breaking strikes, going all the way back to Homestead in 1892. The Flint Common Council, which not surprisingly is under the influence of General Motors, has passed a number of ordinances intended to thwart union organizing efforts, such as Mortimer's. It is illegal to hand out literature on the street. It is illegal to use an amplifier to broadcast a message or speech. To organize Flint, a town that was so completely dominated by the General Motors Corporation, would not be easy, he writes in Organize, his autobiography. An indescribable cloud of fear hung over the city, and it was next to impossible to find anyone who would discuss the union or who would be seen in my company, much less to help in building one. I concluded that if Flint was to be organized, it would have to be done quietly, without publicity, and mostly at night. Okay, so here are some of his methods. So he writes a letter and he mails it out to all the auto workers in Flint. And it says, fellow worker, what does the future hold for you as a worker in the automobile industry? Does it offer you security? Do you face the future unafraid? When your children come out of school, what are their prospects for the future? Do you think GM will be kinder to them than to you? What will become of your aged parents? Are they thrown aside to live as best they can after a lifetime of hard labor? Is the wife you promised to love, honor, and cherish able to enjoy the good things of life she's entitled to? And is she not as precious to you as the employer's wife is to him? And are your children not as sweet and lovable as his? Why, as an American, do you permit this intolerable discrimination against you and yours? You know that you and your family are being deprived of much that belongs to you, and the remedy is in your hands. Sign the enclosed card for membership in the United Automobile Workers and join with many of your fellow workers who have decided that in unity there will be found strength needed to right many wrongs. Fraternally, Wyndham Mortimer. Mortimer's letter is passed around and read on the assembly lines. Little by little, workers respond, mailing back signed applications, along with invitations for personal meetings. Mortimer asks his respondents to arrange small private house parties, to which they invite a few other workers who might be persuaded to join the union. Let's see. Okay, so as he makes his rounds, Mortimer is still paranoid about being trailed by GM agents. He takes evasive measures that could inspire the author of a detective novel. One afternoon, he drives to a movie theater in Saginaw, 30 miles north of Flint, buys a ticket, and steps out an exit door into an alley before the show even starts. Another time, he tells the desk clerk at the Dresden and the boys in the Pengelly building that he's going down to Detroit for the day on union business. Then he drives out of town, drives back in on a dirt road, and spends the night at yet another cheap hotel. When Mortimer visits a prospect's home, he asks the man to invite a few trusted coworkers to a house party. On the night of the meeting, the shades are drawn, and Mortimer listens to workers and their wives talk about life in the plants while they drink coffee and eat donuts paid for by the UAWA. Then, in his quiet way, he pitches the benefits of the union: better pay, an end to the speed up, no more arbitrary firings. He's an auto worker too, so he understands. On most nights, Mortimer leaves with a handful of signed applications and $1 bills for the initiation fee. Most of the 4,000 African-American auto workers in Flint toil at the Buick foundries, shoveling coke into coke ovens and forges. It's the sweatiest, dirtiest job at GM. Mortimer wants to organize these workers too. Who should I contact among the Negroes? He asks the man who has been his entree to the white workforce. I don't want nothing to do with the black bastards, the man replies, but you probably want to talk to old Jim. Mort finds white-haired old Jim sitting out on the porch and introduces himself. Jim, now 60, moved up to Flint from the South, but has found almost as much racial prejudice here as down home. Not just in the plants, but in the federal union too. Blacks are not invited to picnics or bowling nights, and the union has done nothing to get them out of the foundry and into assembly. But you talk to my son-in-law, old Jim says, Henry Clark. He works in the shop. Mort visits Henry Clark's house the next evening. Invited to sit down for supper, he hands Clark a stack of application cards. Take these to the foundry, get them signed, and collect the $1 initiation fee, he instructs Clark. But don't take any chances with your job. I hope no one loses their job in building this union, but if anyone is to be fired, let it be a white man. A few nights later, Mort finds a note under his door at the dresser. Written on a sheet of paper smudged by a dirty hand, the note is difficult to read, but Mort deciphers it as tonight at midnight, followed by an address on Industrial Avenue near the Buick complex in the North End, where most of Flint's black residents reside. At the bottom is a one-word signature, Henry. At midnight, Mort finds himself in front of a tiny spiritualist church, no bigger than the homes of its ill-paid parishioners. No light is coming from inside. Mort knocks. The door opens. Inside are 18 workers from the Buick foundry, sitting around a shaded candle that provides the sanctuary's only illumination. The scene looks like a seance, but Mort tells the people, I came to Flint to improve working conditions and raise living standards. What's the union's policy towards discrimination, asked a voice from the darkness. Toward bettering the bad conditions of the Negro. You see, we have all the problems and worries white folks have. And one more, we're Negroes. The old AFL leadership is gone, Mort tells the workers. The union has a new program, with new leadership that realizes none of us can advance unless all advance. Our program is to fight discrimination and Jim Crow. We have a much better chance of success if the Negro joins us and adds his voice and presence on the union floor. Will we have a union of our own, a man asks. We are not a Jim Crow union, Mort tells him, nor do we have any second-class citizenship. Since the meeting has been held in the church, it ends with a prayer. Mort leaves with 18 application cards and $18. Don't stick your necks out, Mort warns the newly enrolled members. Just quietly get your fellow workers to sign the application card. Let's meet here again next week. Surreptitiously, Clark approaches his fellow foundry workers, asking them to sign union cards. Man, you fool, one says. Another tells him, we ain't going to no union. But others agree to attend meetings in the basement of a worker named Prince Combs, where they listen to recruitment pitches for members of the new local 156th executive board. Those who join get for their dollar a receipt and a UAWA button, although no one is yet bold enough to wear it in the plant. General Motors not only provides the workers with their jobs, it owns many of their houses. GM controls the newspapers its workers read and the politicians who make their laws. The General, as later generations of locals call it, is the most powerful corporation in the world, and its power is magnified tenfold in its hometown. Nobody challenges General Motors in Flint, especially not to advertise membership in a union that's barely a year old. Okay, so that's most of the first chapter, featuring Wyndham Mortimer from Cleveland.
Thank you for reading that for us.
Sure.
My first question, Ted, is what inspired you to write this book?
Well, I think that Travis had mentioned a book I wrote called Nothing But Blue Skies, which was sort of a history of the Rust Belt, and I thought it would just be good to look at one. I wrote about it in that book a little bit, and one reason I wrote about it was that a family friend of ours, a guy named Everett Ketchum, was a sit-down striker. And he was one of the last surviving sit-down strikers. He lived to be 98 years old. And I mean, his life to me really exemplified what the union had gained for the workers in terms of prosperity. He started out working for 25 cents an hour, and he retired 40 years later. He was making $27 an hour as a tool and die maker. He owned a lot of houses in East Lansing that he rented out to Michigan State University students. And he kind of became a local celebrity. They called him the Tooth Fairy because he, at his favorite pancake restaurant, he noticed that one of the waitresses kept covering her mouth. And he said, why are you covering your mouth? And she said, well, I've got really bad teeth. And he said, she said, how much is it going to cost to fix her teeth? And she said $14,000. So he wrote her a check for $14,000.
Wow.
He had that kind of money from a lifetime working at General Motors. And of course, he lived to be 96. And that's a testament to a lifetime GM healthcare, which the auto workers achieved as a result of being in a union. So, there is another book about the sit-down strike. It was written in 1969. It's called Sit Down. It was written in 1969 by a University of Michigan professor named Sidney Fine. And, but, to me, it's more of an academic book. And I wanted my book, I hope as you can tell, to be more of like a storytelling book. And it was written at such a different time in the history of Flint and the union labor movement and the middle class and the auto industry. In 1969, we were at a time of unprecedented equality in this country, economic equality, and it looked as though the gains that the labor movement had made during the Depression, during the New Deal era, were permanent. We found that out to not to be the case over the last 50 years. Now we're at a time when inequality is as high as it's been since the 20s, since before the New Deal and the labor movement really got started. And it's really been amazing to me to follow this unionizing effort at the Amazon facility in Alabama, and to see that their concerns and what they want is so similar to what the sit-down strikers wanted. I mean, they want a more humane pace of labor. They say they're being driven too hard. Their quotas are too high. They want more job security. They want more say in the workplace. So this, what the sit-down strikers wanted, it's what workers have always wanted, and what workers always will want, and what they're still fighting for.
Yeah, and at the end of the book, you said if they had a sit-down strike at Amazon,
right,
it would really affect the country.
Well, especially now that everybody's staying home and ordering everything over the internet. There were some walkouts at an Amazon facility in Chicago because workers felt that the plant was unsafe. I mean, these people, they're on the front lines. They're essential workers. They're at greater risk of COVID than anybody else. But these essential workers are often, even though they're supposedly essential, they're some of the lowest paid people in our labor force.
So what happened to them? They walked out.
Yeah, well, they got greater safety measures there.
And you also write that people that are in unions now it's public service people like librarians.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Right. We have a union here.
Yeah. The public sector is now more unionized than the private sector. I think it used to be a third of private sector workers were in unions in the 1950s, and now I think it's maybe 6%. Every year in Flint they have a celebration of the end of the sit-down strike on February 11th, which was the day it was settled, and they call it White Shirt Day, and they all wear white shirts, and it's to show that they're just as good as management. And I went to one a couple of years ago, and there was a vice president of the United Auto Workers there, and she said that most auto workers in the U.S. now are non-union because all the foreign auto plants that set up down south, Volkswagen and Toyota and BMW, they're all non-union. And there was an effort to organize a Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga a few years ago, but it failed.
Yeah, and I think I'm reading Blue Skies right now, and I think you said in that book that some management people didn't like the labor force in the South because they weren't as educated.
Right.
They could barely read and write, and they're coming back here.
Yeah. I think that, but they moved down there because they want to avoid unions.
Yeah.
There. Yeah. I think that was a guy in Syracuse who said that. Yeah.
And
because
and I was going to say the other thing is fresh water.
Right.
I always think they're going to come back for the Great Lakes.
Well, we that's always the great hope of the of the Great Lakes. I know that they worked really hard before, because we're always losing clout. We're always losing congressmen in every census. And I know maybe 10 years ago, they worked really hard to, codify that no water can be taken out of the Great Lakes watershed. If you move to the desert to get away from the winter in Cleveland or Chicago, you can't take the water with you. If you want it, you can have all the water you want. You can drink all the water you want. You just have to move here. So that's
Canada too signed that pact.
Right. And people in Chicago are saying we're going to be big winners in the era of climate change, because it's going to be the whole country's going to turn into a desert, and this will be the only livable place left.
Actually, I think that's probably true, and I have read many years ago with the oil wars and people talking about going to war for oil. They're going to go to war for water now.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. You talked to some of the strikers' family members, didn't you?
A few. There was the daughter. I have the second chapter is called the Perkins Boys, and it's about kind of a wildcat strike when all the workers walked out to protest the firing of these two guys named Perkins brothers. And the daughter and the niece of one of them, I met in Flint, and she actually contacted me yesterday. She wanted to get some books from me. But for the most part, I worked with. There was a series of oral histories done in the 70s and 80s by some researchers at the University of Michigan Flint in their labor history project. So I worked with a lot of those to get it firsthand from the workers, because they're all gone.
Yeah.
And that's another reason I wrote the book, because there's nobody left to tell the story anymore.
And I think now I always say, because I'm a middle-aged baby boomer, I'm right in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember many years ago there was something on PBS about the strike. It was a little history, a little movie about it. Do you remember that?
Well, the BBC did something in 1976. You can watch that on YouTube, and then there's a documentary with babies and banners. You can also see that on YouTube. That's about the Women's Emergency Brigade, and I wrote a whole chapter about them.
Yeah.
Because when the strike started, there were women working in Fisher One in the cut and sew department and the upholstery department, but they were told to go home because the strikers didn't want any rumors about what might be going on between men and women in the plant. But there was a woman named Janora Johnson, who was a striker's wife, she went down to volunteer at strike headquarters, and they said, well, you can work in the kitchen, but she wanted to do more than that. So when they had the Battle of the Running Bulls, which was when that's another chapter in the book, that's when the police attacked Fisher 2, and the strikers repelled them by throwing door hinges at them and spraying them with fire hoses. The women ran down, and when the police retreated, they fired at the strikers. They shot 14 strikers, and these women ran down there and kind of put their bodies between the police and the strikers. And they said, well, we're gonna have sort of this paramilitary force to support our men. And they wore red berets and red armbands and carried billy clubs. And at one point, when the plant police tear gassed workers inside a plant, they used the billy clubs to break all the windows and let the tear gas out.
And that reminded me a lot of this recent Capitol riot in Washington, D.C., with people with, poles and clubs and fighting in the gas. And gosh, I thought, some things just don't change. People are fighting for what they think is right. And those women probably ended up working in the GM plants when the war started, because all the men went away.
Rosie the Riveter.
Yeah. In fact, my mother worked at Fisher Body in Cleveland in the early 50s. And at the time she was just married and she was making more money than my father. That didn't go over well in those days. So yeah, I thought that I didn't realize they were so involved in the strike. Let's see. The shrinking of the middle class. That's really sad. That was really, really sad when I thought about that, you know? Okay, I'm not sure what the title means.
What?
The title of your book means.
Oh, well, because the strike actually started at 10:30, but at midnight they had control of the plant.
Okay.
I think I could have just called it Vehicle City. My agent liked that title, Midnight in Vehicle City, but then that book Midnight in Chernobyl came out in the meantime. So maybe I don't know, maybe it's kind of a flight of fancy.
Yeah. Yeah. What are you reading now?
Let's see. I'm reading a book called, I'm looking at it, Meditations of a Great Lakes Sailor. It's a memoir. It's actually a guy who's he's from Northeastern Ohio, from Conneaut.
Yeah.
Which was a steel port, and he worked on ships from U.S. Steel in the 50s, and so he writes about all these eccentric characters he met working on the boats and all the bars he went to, like there was these famous bars called Peckerhead Kate's and Horseface Mary's in Chicago. So,
yeah, you wrote about that. I don't know, in this book, or maybe it was in Blue Skies.
Yeah, but it was probably in Blue Skies. Yeah. So this was a guy named Stanley B. Graham. He died maybe about a year ago of COVID. So he was in his 90s.
Oh, yeah, that's something. It's something to talk to people that age.
Yeah.
Now, did you learn anything new that you didn't know about the strike when you were doing all your research?
Yeah, I mean, probably that it wasn't primarily about money. It was about it was about working conditions. It was about dignity. Some of the strikers, they would do anything to hang on to their jobs. A foreman could just fire you one day, just give you a pink slip, and then the next day his brother-in-law could be working in your spot in the line. So they would bring food to the bosses. They would bring
as a bride.
As a bride. They paint their houses. They throw parties for them and look the other way if they got fresh with their wives. So these guys wanted job security according to seniority, and the older workers, they couldn't keep up and they got cut loose. And they wanted an end to the speed up, and they got that. They got time studies so that they didn't have to go through that anymore.
And they slowed down when the time study people came in.
That's right. That's what someone told me.
Yeah. To make it seem like it took longer to do the job. Right. Okay.
There are a few. Hey, Barb, there are a few questions from the audience. If you want me to ask a few audience questions.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Why don't we do that?
So the first one is when you were telling a story about Mortimer at the beginning.
Yeah.
Someone asked, how did he get the list of employees to mail them the letter?
Oh, he got it out of the city directory. I actually wrote that in there, but I skipped over it. The R.L. Polk city directory, and it tells everybody's occupation. Or I don't know if they do those anymore, but it told everybody's occupation. And so he looked for people who work for General Motors, and he sent them all letters.
You can look at those online. Some libraries have those online.
Oh, do they? Okay, yeah. I
mhm,
don't. I know that you can go to libraries and they'll be there in the archives from years past. But I actually worked for them in the like 1992. I don't know if they're still doing that.
I don't know.
I don't know if they're still producing those.
It's
Yeah,
maybe the
occasionally we
price.
get calls at the library about how valuable those are, and please
Yeah.
don't weed them.
Oh, right. Yeah. I
Anyone
mean,
out there who has
they're
directories,
great for
send them.
research. I think I looked looked up some of my characters in my book inside in the Flint City directories from the 1930s.
Another audience question. It's more, maybe it's more of a comment, but I bet you can comment on top of it.
Okay.
The reader says, my mother grew up in Flint, now 95 years old, and lived one street away from the industrial and the Buick factory, ran for miles at the end of her street. She said that her father loaded all the kids in the car and rode to the Fisher body plant to see the men hang outside the second-story windows, hoisting up food strike. My mother's family was always very proud that none of them went into the auto factories for work, crossing the picket line.
Oh yeah, is this somebody who grew up in Flint?
Yeah, she grew up. Well, her mother lived in. Let's see, mother grew up in Flint, and she's now 95 years old.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I know what she's talking about. Those Buick that turned into Buick City, that industrial complex on the north end of Flint off Industrial Avenue, and that at one point employed 28,000 workers, I think, maybe in the 80s and the 90s, and now it's just been demolished. Like, so much else, so many other auto plants in Flint. One statistic I have in my book was that in 1980, Flint had the highest wages for young workers in America because of these great GM wages. And there were about 80,000 GM workers in the Flint area. Now there are only 6,500. So, Flint now is probably, it's better known for its water crisis, which was a result of, the city going broke and being put under the supervision of an emergency manager. And Flint was really a city that was GM or bust. And, now because of automation and changes in the marketplace, they're only about 10% of the workers. GM has about 10% of the workers it used to have. So when GM went bust, Flint went bust.
Similar story to Lordstown in Ohio, obviously. I mean, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I knew a guy. I knew a guy who was from the Flint area, and he was working in Lordstown, and he was just living across the highway in a trailer. Now he's back working in Michigan. Yeah, but they shut that down. They were making the Chevy. They were making the Chevy Cruze there, and that's been shut down.
Yeah, I drove by Lordstown recently, and they're Trump promised to bring their jobs back after the whatever, and now they're making an electric truck there, and I wonder, what I'm most likely not the same union jobs that support a middle class family.
But it's not GM. It's a different company.
No, it's a different. It's a
Because have you seen the new GM logo? It kind of looks like a plug, because they want to. They were really, they for forever. People thought they were sort of behind the curve, behind what the Japanese and the Germans were doing, and so I think they really made a push to be the company that produced the first the electric car. That that was going to be the Volt, and that was going to symbolize the electric car the way the Prius had symbolized the hybrid car. So now they've got the Volt and the Bolt, and they're making those at the plant in Hamtramck, and so GM is trying not to look like the the legacy industrial giant. They're trying to look like this forward-looking environmental corporation now.
Yeah, I suppose, I don't know. That's good, I guess.
Yeah.
I
Well, I mean,
mean,
I love to go to the auto show every year. They haven't had it they had it last year. I went last year, but they didn't have it. They're not going to have it this year. The last year in the Chicago Auto Show, it's in February. I always look for the GM electric cars before anything else.
Hmm.
Sorry, Barb, I'll let you take back over here in a second, but there are a few more audience questions. So
Okay.
if you don't mind, I'll just.
No, I don't mind. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm not sure if you want to go here or not, but someone asked a question. Have you ever given thought, when you're thinking about the shrinking middle class, to just what Walmart represents with regard to the shrinking middle class?
Well, no, I think it represents a lot because Walmart, Dollar General. I think I remember when everybody shopped at Sears. You remember we all used to shop at Sears.
Yes.
Sears was a company that geared itself to the middle class, and Sears is almost gone now. Now everybody shops, at Neiman Marcus or Walmart or Dollar General. There's no middle in the market anymore. There's the high end stuff, and then there's the people buying the cheap crap.
And isn't Walmart,
so I think Walmart symbolizes a lot.
Isn't it the biggest employer?
I think it was. It might have been at one point. Maybe it still is. Amazon's is giving them a run for their money, certainly.
Yes.
What do you think of? So I mean, I think the Amazon thing is interesting because, like, we live near Euclid. I mean, I'm sure it's the same story in Chicago, but in Euclid, near where we live, Amazon opened up a really big distribution center. Like, they took over a huge, and so they, when they do that, they take over, obviously, like industrial blight, and they turn into something. They turn into a huge employer. So that's a positive. And also, Euclid's not the highest employment area. And all of a sudden, anyone who can walk in the door can get a $15 an hour job. And yet, we're dealing with, obviously, boy, you gotta think about Amazon. I don't know, but I want.
Well, I had a Christmas rush job at Amazon once, and the hiring was, they brought you in and they said, all right, you got a job, you just have to pass this drug test. That's it.
Yeah.
There was no interview.
Yeah, I mean, that's not so bad. I don't know.
Yeah. It actually wasn't that bad of a job. I mean, it was in a fulfillment center, where I think we were making sure packages went to the right place. I don't know if that's a fulfillment center. I'm not sure.
I think that's what they opened in Euclid.
Yeah, we weren't actually taking stuff off the shelves, which I heard and packaging it. I heard that's a really tough job.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because it's obviously a non-union job, obviously a big, you would think evil corporation, non-judgmentally, but at the same time, a total turnaround for that community. So I don't know.
How many jobs how many people are they employing in Euclid?
It's thousands. I don't know.
Wow.
I'm not, but yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, one last question from there. And everyone, don't be shy. Keep typing in your questions. But Sandy asks you if you could talk a little bit about the organizer and what he did after the strike.
He was executive. He was the first vice president of the UAW. So he was involved in negotiating the settlement, and once it was signed, he drove up from Detroit to Flint and read it to the workers. But I said in there that he was a communist, and eventually he kind of fell out of favor with the union because after World War II, Walter Reuther, purged all the communists and socialists from the UAW, even though they had played a big role in founding it. So he ended up, I think he moved out to California, and he ended up not being involved in the UAW at all later in his life. But he did write a memoir, which was actually published by the same publisher who did this book, Beacon Press in Boston, and it was called Organize. And so that was a good resource for me, and a good source of scenes and dialogue.
Cool. Yeah. So, Barb, sorry for interrupting there.
Oh, that's okay. I didn't have any more questions, so.
Okay. Well, I just want to tell people that I think we said it on there. Since I can't travel around and sign books like I have in past book tours, if you want a personalized signed book plate, you can paste in your book. I've got them here, and you can just contact me at my email, tedmcclelland@gmail.com. And they're suggesting, you buy the book at Max Backs in Cleveland. I did a How to Speak Midwestern reading there. So I would encourage you to support them, support your local independent bookstore. And hopefully you'll find this book a compelling read. I wrote it in the, you can see I wrote it in the present tense. I tried to make it sound immediate, sound exciting, sound like something that could be happening today.
Are you writing anything now, Ted?
Well, actually, I just finished writing a novel, actually. And it's kind of a fictional sequel to this book. It's called Running for Home, and it's going to be published by Bottom Dog Press in Huron, Ohio, which how far is Huron from Willoughby?
Huron's about an hour from Willoughby.
Okay.
I happen to love Huron and go. It's near Sandusky, where I go like all the time.
All right. Yeah.
So
yeah.
It's a congratulations on that.
Well, I read that they published working class Midwestern literature. Literally, that was the first publisher I sent the book to, and they took it right away. And
it's fantastic.
It's about kind of a young track star, and it takes place in the 80s when these plants are closing down. So 2 generations after. His grandfather had been, I call it the Wildcat Strikers, but his grandfather had been involved in the founding of the union. And so I guess it's a fictional sequel to this book, and that's supposed to come out in April. They publish those things quickly.
Awesome.
Is it semi-autobiography?
I suppose. I mean, he goes to school across from an auto plant, and I went to school across from an auto plant, and he runs track and cross country, and so do I. I mean, he's much faster than I was.
Yeah. Okay.
Make myself a track star, even since I wasn't one in real life. So they say if you can't have it in real life, you can have it on paper.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Yeah, we'll have you back again for that one.
All right.
Line
I'd
it
love
up.
to come back. I'm becoming a regular at Willoughby.
Yeah, you really are. Well, it's because you're publishing so many books.
I know.
So that's good on you.
Yeah.
This is my dog. My dog finally making an appearance on.
Hi there.
Travis told me that you knew the girl who wrote Rust.
Well, I don't know her, but we exchange books. I know her. David Giffels knows her, and I know David Giffels. Giffels. Yeah. David Giffels. He wrote he wrote me a blurb. I can read it here. The battles were fought bitterly, often viciously, with rocks and bottles, blackjacks and hammers against the brick and soot backdrop of America's industrial cities in the 1930s. The war was for the dignity of the American worker. The tactic was to strike. A vivid, granular drama rich with characters, scenes, and the soulful gravity of the workers' fight for decency gave Giffels, author of Barnstorming, Ohio, to understand America. I know he's a very beloved author in Northeastern Ohio.
Yeah, we had him in for a talk a while ago, and actually, you told me about Rust.
At least
you told me I should have her for a talk.
Well, I think she lives in Willoughby, and so you did have her in.
Yeah, Yeah, we had her in, and
Oh,
she was
great.
And she was
Great.
very thankful to you for making that connection.
Oh,
So,
okay. All right.
pretty cool.
I haven't heard from her. I sent her a signed copy of this book because she sent me a signed copy of her book. I love to get signed books. I have a collection. When I buy a paperback, when I buy a paperback, I like to get it signed. If I'm going to spend all my money, I want to get a keepsake.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying I can get you a signature if you buy my book.
Okay.
Hey, one last. I think it's a good question to wrap up on, and I like to ask audience questions when they send them in. But what's the outlook for unions as we head into the 2020s?
Well, I think we all need to watch what's happening at Amazon. Industrial unionism. The outlook has not been good for that, but we're kind of in a post-industrial era, and if this new sector, this Amazon sector, can be organized, I think that's a real sign that unions are going to make a comeback. And I suppose we have a labor-friendly president now, so that should help. That should help as well. He's from Scranton.
There you go.
Oh yeah.
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 Isn't everyone from Scranton one way or
I don't know. I've never been to Scranton. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, all right, Ted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Coming
Thank
into
you.
the Barb. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
doing heavy lifting there.
And I did watch that Twilight Zone episode about Willoughby. So
oh, good. It's a classic.
So yeah, and
I've seen it like 30 times.
Wow.
I hit play again and again at Let's Stop Willoughby one year. So.
Wow. All right. Well, Willoughby's become a virtual home for me then.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. We'll see you like in April for the new book.
All right. I'll keep in touch with you about that. All right. Thanks a lot, Travis.
Thanks a lot.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.